from conflict to courage. Conflict and courage is the topic for today. Like most of the topics that I choose, it's because I've written about it, and I've written about it because generally it's been a live issue for, one or more clients, usually several clients. And my observation is that whenever I'm kind of doing strategy work with people, there's tension, there's healthy tension. Often there's creative tension, but often it's over resources, etc. And there's a difference between the ways that different teams handle that. And you'll all be familiar with this. Some teams work through it really, really well, really productively. Other teams, it just sort of sticks in the background, and every so often it surfaces, which is really unhelpful when you're someone like me coming in to try and help improve things, when you've got all this unresolved conflict going on. But that's my opinion, and I've talked and written about what to do about it, but I thought that this evening I would introduce you to somebody who I think is a bit of an expert in this subject, and that's Marlene Chism. You will have heard her speak earlier. She speaks all over the world. She's a regular on LinkedIn Live. If you're into this kind of topic and you ever tune into LinkedIn Live, you will have seen Marlene talk about it. She's written several books. In fact, I think the first time that we properly spoke at length was back in 2014-15, when Marlene was writing this, No Drama Leadership. I don't know if you can see that, which is a fantastic book, made all the better because it's got a big slice of one of my articles in here, which Marlene asked if she could reproduce. And I was so flattered, I didn't know whether to say yes, please, thank you, or whatever. So Marlene, I just kind of welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll just sort of ask you to briefly introduce yourself and answer me this question. So in your experience, having seen loads of this stuff, why do we get conflict emerging? Where do you see it emerging? And why do we struggle with it so much?
Wow, I've got 3 hours to explain. Okay, hang with me. No, I'm joking. I think that lack of clarity, and I know, Martyn, you've written on this a lot, and I've been very inspired. Sometimes you write something and I'm like, gosh, I'm going to take that and run with it as well. But lack of clarity, I always say in all drama, there's always a lack of clarity, and the one with clarity navigates the ship. But what I find in conflict that makes it worse is, number one, the way that we define it. And then also we have an inner conflict that's going on. And if we don't address that, all the techniques and tips in the world isn't going to help.
You mentioned earlier you're based in the US. So whereabouts are you, and what kind of organizations do you work with?
I'm right in the middle. I'm in Springfield, Missouri, in the Ozarks. And I work with all kinds of organizations, from small business to tech companies to larger, like if it's a larger or government type of organization, I might do more training. But if it's privately owned, and like for a tech company, I may be working with the founders. So it's just different groups, and I offer different things depending on what they're needing.
And you and I have spoken about this kind of topic, conflicts and silos and breakdowns in communication and that sort of thing for, on and off for many years. And when I've spoken about this, I guess most of my kind of frameworks that I use with people come from the Kilman model, which I know you're familiar with, but you sort of simplified that a lot. In our last conversation, you gave a really sort of simple breakdown with that around the 3 A's. So do you want to just kind of talk people through maybe what Kilman is, a bit of a background, but also, your 3 A's take?
Yes, I love the Kilman model. I've studied it. I studied it when I was getting my master's degree, and he talks about 5 types of ways that people deal with conflict. Like, I can't remember all that. It's confusing. And so as I really kind of dug deep, I thought it's really about what I call the 3 A's. What I see as the dysfunctional ways that we manage conflict is appeasing, avoiding, and aggression. So I call that the 3 A's. And what I noticed was at the root of that truly is avoidance. And so it's not just appeasing is a form of avoidance, but we can talk about those distinctions more if you want to. I even think aggression is avoidance, because people that are bullying and that are aggressive and really high conflict, they use that as a coping mechanism because they're not aware of their own energy, so to speak, but also they're afraid of intimacy. They're afraid to talk about what upsets them and their feelings, and they don't want someone to keep pushing. So aggression is the way to avoid going deeper into that conversation.
And I think you're right. A lot of it does come back, and you and I spoke very briefly about this beforehand. And those three A's, I'm going to just kind of remind people of them, because what I'm going to ask you to do, and it's a bit of an imposition, but hopefully you're okay with it. I'm going to ask you to break into little groups, which I will kind of just allocate randomly. And I'll give you a fourth A. So three A's are aggression, avoidance, and appeasement. The fourth A that I'll give you is anything else. So just to kind of share with each other, when you look at conflict situations, the unresolved conflict, the negative types of conflict in your organization, in your kind of recent history, in your experience, I guess, where do they fit in those three A's? Is there more than one, more of one than another, or are there types of conflict that you see quite regularly that don't seem to fit into those? So aggression, appeasement, and avoidance. Everybody is now back, I hope. I'll just have a quick look. Fantastic, you're all back. So I'll just randomly look and sort of pick on one or two people, if that's all right, just to give your thoughts. Toby, I noticed you muted straight away. Did you? What
muted because I was asked to mute before.
Oh, you're so good. In your group, where was the kind of consensus around those three A's or other things? Did you get to that?
Well, there was one. Well, first of all, my three colleagues in that room were all in a sort of charity type background. So I think they felt that avoiding conflict, especially in the mode of helping other people, that they're in a different sort of mode of thinking and so on, and trying to be supportive and trying to be helpful rather than opening up. So that's one aspect, I think, of the type of organization you're in, maybe that changes the behavior of people. And the other thing was that I think David suggested that there might be something, another A, which is to do with, and he didn't know whether it fitted into these, which is sort of arrogance or preciousness and so on, which I guess he must have observed in his, in his time as a consultant, I guess.
And probably done myself as well.
Yeah, yes. So it was interesting, but the main, I think the main thing to me, the question was, you have a view that you want to move forward with a group of other people, and you're not always going to see eye to eye. So conflicts arise. None of us like it. We try to avoid it. We'd prefer to have a life without it. But on the other hand, you can't let things go, because otherwise your company, your organization doesn't move forward if you avoid the things that actually are necessary to address.
Absolutely. Well put. Very well put. I've got a few other sort of familiar faces, which I'm sure you won't mind being putting on the spot. And then afterwards, I'll just kind of ask, other people's views. I can see Mike Adamson. Mike, would you venture to share the conclusions that you drew from your conversation?
So we had, we talked about avoidance in our organizations at times. What I talked about was a sort of frustration that that the diversity of perspectives that I genuinely believe we have don't get converted into creative value fast enough by the people who are working, across each other and not listening and hearing to each other. And I don't know whether it's actually turning into, so we're not unlocking enough value in some of those conversations, and it may or may not convert into conflict. Certainly converts into tension, but it's not being turned into real value fast enough, and too often might require a resolution from a more senior person, be that me or somebody else more senior further down the track. And if we're going to unlock the organization to really perform, we've got to turn that diversity of perspectives into value. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I want to pick on one more person who I've not seen in ages, Jason. It's been years. How are you? Great to see you. But also, what did you get from the conversation?
I'm very well, Martin. Good to see you as well. No, it's been a while. Yeah, I now work in the legal sector for litigation lawyers, and I think there it's one of appeasement and avoidance. You don't get aggressive conflict at all. They like to ask questions, and lots of them. And I suppose speaking to the other person in the group, Sarah, she was saying that she has more from a charity side of it around trying to allocate funds to parent carers, etc. So she has a completely different, probably more of an emotional reaction and aggression that way, because it's much more personal, isn't it, and how that value has to be applied. And she has limited funds. And of course, I'm probably sat on the other side with the lawyers, with the parents going, come on, where is the money? So yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and one that you've just got to cut through, is my general feeling, is just air it and get the decisions on the table.
Thank you for that from all of you. I've just realised I chose 3 guys. That was kind of subconscious bias is going on there. So my apologies for that. So I will be interested to hear a broader perspective of views. Is there any other kind of experiences or perspectives that you would share?
I think there was one comment in our group, Martin, which was that actually conflict where it's healthy is not a bad thing sometimes. Mm-hmm. It can lead to a resolution, but at least it's then healthy and open.
Which I think is what Herbie and Jason were kind of both alluding to. I think that's exactly right. Marlene, what did you make from?
Well, I've got so many notes. We had a fun group. We talked about how, it's sort of like the elephant. Someone thinks it's the tusk and someone thinks it's the tail, the blind man and the elephant, that analogy that we've all heard. Someone says, oh, it's a tusk, it's hard, it's thick. Or someone says it's a tail, it's this, or it's rough. And I said, yeah, but if we could just all agree that the elephant smells bad, at least we've got a place to start, So it's that we see things differently. And what came to me was this, that conflict, and we all know this logically, conflict can be valuable and getting those diversity of opinions. But this is what I say, conflict is not the problem, mismanagement is. We're uncomfortable with conflict. It creates something within us, and something that came up for me listening to my group that just reinforced, and I want to really make sure I get this in the book. The biggest problem with conflict is the belief that I'm right. I believe everything I think. If you don't speak up, I think you're not engaged. If you avoid it, if you like someone that appeases, they think they've got to do that and walk on eggshells for someone else to be satisfied. And that thought that they believe is right creates an inner belief and a dialogue that creates an action. And so the biggest problem is that we're not curious. And because someone disagrees with our viewpoint, we feel threatened. And that creates this inner conflict that we're not comfortable resolving. And so by definition, we create conflict by the very definition of it. So what I'm attempting to do is to say, if you view conflict as 2 arrows going in opposite directions and look at conflict as opposing drives, desires, and demands, that takes the personality out of it. If I have a different drive and a different demand than you do, and I'm a business unit manager and you're a business unit manager, and we're trying for the same budget, we have different drives, desires, and demands. And if I can understand yours and you can understand mine, we might be able to collaborate in a way that works. But if I just think you're trying to screw me over, then I'm going to have a problem.
And that whole depersonalization, I was taught years ago, back when I had a proper job, around, certain forms of language to try and address these things in a depersonalized way. And I think what I was taught, if I remember rightly, was to use a sequence of phrases. So when you do this thing, which is a kind of observable, fact, you do this thing, I'm not kind of making it up. When you do this thing, I feel X, Y, A, B, C, which again is sort of, it's not really arguable because that's how I feel. So when I feel, and then or whatever the consequences, and to structure language in a way that makes it really objective, as opposed to me sort of projecting what I think what you must be thinking, or what you must be trying to achieve, or whatever it is. You have to try and take all of that out of it. So you've done this in practice so many times. What are the kind of language techniques that you've developed along the way?
You know, I wanted to speak to that just for a moment. You and I talked about this briefly. I remember reading about those techniques, and they can work, but here's the problem with it, that it might not work sometimes, is someone might go, I don't care how you feel. I'm not responsible for how you feel. You know, you're misinterpreting. So it can, even like with really aggressive people, that may not work. But I do use observable behaviors. I observed you slam the door. I observed that. I noticed that you slammed the door when I ask you a question. And I'll say, the story I'm telling myself, or like, I saw you rolled your eyes at the meeting when I brought this issue up. The story I'm telling myself is that you disagree, but that you don't want to tell me that. What's up? Like, I'm inviting and I'm owning the story that I tell. So I have like kind of 3 courage components that I use in my work. And one is I take responsibility for my interpretation and my experience. Number 2, I face my own dark side and know that I have certain patterns that I'm not aware of, or that I'm impatient. I'm task-oriented sometimes. And then finally, represent yourself. Like, I experienced, I felt, I saw versus everybody else feels the same way. Those things are manipulative. So I think represent yourself. So what I saw, what I think, but be willing to be wrong. And that takes curiosity. When this happened, this is what I noticed, and this is how I perceived that. When you interrupted me 3 times, and they might say, no, I didn't. Can I share my experience? My experience was not being able to say what I wanted to say. And the story I'm telling myself is that you don't think what I have to say is important. Now, normally someone's going to do this. Oh, that's just your perception. Or, oh, no, not at all. Most people will not admit when you've called something out. That's what I've noticed. And our job isn't to win an argument or bring them full force into an argument. It's to then say, if they go, oh, not at all, that's just your feelings. You're just too sensitive. The position there is to say, perhaps I am. This is what I need from you in the future. Can I get your agreement?
Just by recognizing and accepting that, you can then move the conversation where you want the conversation to move. And I think that that's really powerful. But the other thing which, and it sounds, you know, from somebody who's quite a rationalist, it sounds very, very fluffy, but that the story that we tell ourselves is not just in terms of whether you use it in language, but as a concept. We're constantly telling ourselves stories about, you know, why I put on this one from a recent conversation. You know, I asked somebody, you know, why is it that you seem to put on this sort of emotional armor when you go into a meeting with this group of people, that you become sort of really quite distant and quite closed, and everything has to be right, and you seem to have to want to be perfect. You know, why do you do that? And the story that this person was telling themselves was about trust and about individuals. And from an external perspective, that's not the story you see playing out. That's the story that they've kind of created based on an awful lot of reasons. So even that concept of we tell ourselves these stories is a really powerful one.
And we don't really even know that we do that. I mean, I've always been interested in that kind of thing because I'm very interested in personal growth. And here's what's interesting. I almost got a book deal from a British publisher, but they said I was too interested in personal growth, and British people don't like personal growth. And I'm like, I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. But then again, I wouldn't, because I'm from the USA. But like, here's something that I took a class in narrative coaching so that I could be a better coach and a better listener for I'm not a therapist, but I think I could be. I'm naturally inclined toward that. And so here's something that has stuck with me to such a great impact for me. Our stories are the source of our suffering. So what I tell myself about myself either creates suffering or freedom for me. If I say, well, I'm not wanted, I'm not included, that story, I will look for evidence to make that story true, because that's how our brain works. We have something in it called the reticular activating system. And if I say I'm not wanted and I'm not included, that's exactly what evidence will show up, because we're looking for it. And then the next piece is that new stories require, or new behaviors require a new story. We're never going to outlive our story. So if I believe that I can't do something, or that you don't like my opinions, or that because I'm a woman, you're not listening to me and I'm going to be ultra offended, then I'm going to replay that and reinforce that versus saying, you know, Martyn didn't mean not to call on women. He's just talking to his friends. That it's not a bad thing. We're all biased, you know. I mean, he's asking me to be on his show, and I'm a female. So we get the evidence we look for. And then there is no access to a new story without self-regulation. So a lot of the work I'm doing right now is about regulating yourself by managing your stories and questioning your interpretation to say, are there 3 other explanations for why this happened? Possibly. And I don't know the whole story. So I've got to be comfortable with the unknown and comfortable getting curious and comfortable being vulnerable enough to say that kind of hurt my feelings. And I don't know if you meant to or not, but if I don't tell you, you can't correct it. So that's how I look at that.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions now to dip into those 3 A's. And what I'd encourage all of you on the call to do is you will have questions. I have no doubt you'll have questions. So use the time that we've got Marlene here for, use the chat. So there's a couple of little sort of DMs that I've had in the chat with some questions in there, but share them because other people will have views on them. So use the chat, stick your questions in as I'm going, and I'll start to feed those in to Marlene. But just on those 3 A's, the one which, you know, I see probably most of, particularly in what I would call sort of, you know, my grand term, the conflict immature teams, the teams that just aren't mature around conflict yet, is avoidance. It's sort of almost by default. And you talked about, you know, most things come back to avoidance. So even aggression kind of comes back. So why do we avoid conflict by default? And more importantly, I guess, what do we do about that? What do we do to overcome that? Practical steps.
Well, we avoid it. And this sounds so, I guess it sounds like I'm going to face the east and look at crystals. I mean, it probably does. But the reason we avoid it is we don't like how something makes us feel. That's the only reason. It's an emotional issue that whenever we have anger or upset or feel, when we perceive that we're being discounted or threatened, there's chemicals in your body that those are the emotions, and it feels a certain way, and it makes you kind of sick at your stomach, or it makes your neck get hot and you feel this surge of energy, which is anger. And because we don't know how to let that process through, we make up a story about it, and then we either avoid or we lash out. That's what happens. And so a lot of the work I've been doing is about getting comfortable with discomfort. And I call that in my book the inner game of conflict. And I'm noticing, Martyn, how I'm improving, because I can be aggressive when I don't like something. And so it's something I'm working on. And what will make me feel that way is either being blindsided or to have someone tell me that I'm not telling the truth about something when I know the facts. For example, I had a credit card that didn't work. I got a new one. It didn't go through. I tried it 3 times. And they argued with me, like from the credit union said, well, no, it would not have gone through on our end if it wasn't working. And I said, I can tell you, though, I've used it 3 times. And in the past, I would have gotten a little bit snippy. And I was just able to say, she said, I just want you to try it one more time, maybe at a gas station. I said, okay. And because the truth is, me getting snippy doesn't change it. There's an outcome that I need. The outcome is either to change the card or to figure out what's going on. And it seemed like she wasn't able to see any other choice but me to try it 3 more times. But the good news is, this is just a small victory for me, that I didn't get aggressive and get really aggravated and threaten to pull my money out of the bank or whatever, because she's just trying to understand it from where she's looking at the portal. She's looking at things from her point of view, and I can't possibly understand that. So now I know my next step, if I want to keep that card, is just to call and say, I need this one to cancel out. And I don't need you to understand it. I just need you to do it.
And is when you're coaching people or groups or individuals whose default is to avoid conflict, I mean, are there certain things that you would give them? Or how would you help them get a better?
Well, I want to find out first what they're telling themselves about it, because most of the time when people are avoiding, they've already created a scenario in their mind, and it goes like this. I already know what they're going to say. I already know what they're going to say, because we've had this conversation. I've told them, they'll say, I've told them 1,000 times. And I'll jokingly say, what that means is you've allowed it 999 times. And so I already know what they'll say. Then my question is, are you willing to let them actually say it by asking again? Because their resistance is what's causing the problem. because they don't know how to guide the conversation after they get the resistance. That's the real problem. It's not that the person's going to say it. And the reason the person's going to say what they've always said is because you're showing up from the same intention and energy that you've always shown up from. When you change your outcome in your mind about where you're going to go and what that resistance is going to look like, it changes the dynamics of the conversation.
I think this relates to a question that Helen's just posted in the chat as well, which is if somebody lacks confidence, they'll avoid. So I guess even, you know, you've unpicked the fact that they've got this story that they're telling themselves, etc., but they still lack confidence. How do you build confidence around this stuff?
I call it the fulcrum point of change. And the idea here is that nothing happens until someone's willing. What I try to do is to find out where I can create willingness, because it's one, like if I'm trying to get them to go, let's say to the island 5,000 miles away, and they've got a rowboat, one oar, and no map, I'm not going to get them to take that leap of courage. It's too far. They don't have the resources. They're scared. But if I can say, would you just get in the boat? And if they'll do that, I've moved it. If I'll say, would you be willing to at least write down the things that are bothering you about this person? If they'll at least do that, I've moved energy, so to speak. I've gotten them one step closer. So I call that shortening the gap. And so it's the same thing when working with employees, when they say, yes, but that will be difficult. Where we get off track as leaders is we engage in the conversation about the difficulty. And that's not the issue. When someone says, yes, but that's difficult, you say, yes, it probably is. Are you willing to try it anyway? And then what you'll find is they'll say, well, it's not really that it's difficult. It's that it's going to take a lot of time. Do you say, not really? When you consider, you don't get into ping pong. You don't get into an argument. You say, yeah, it will take some time. So the question, though, is, are you willing to try it? Well, I might be embarrassed, though, if I fail. So now we know the real issue is I might be embarrassed and I might fail. So the reality is here, would you be willing to face a little bit of embarrassment just to move this forward? And when they say yes, now you've moved the needle and you've overcome conflict, because nothing happens until there's willingness. So with my clients, I try to find where they're stuck and where they're not willing. And I try to move the needle just one place, because if they create a different story about themselves and they're willing to do one small act of courage, that will create an energy for them that will motivate them to move forward. And especially if on the other side of the phone or the Zoom camera, I'm that witness that's supportive, that even if you messed up, it's okay, that you're experimenting and there's not a complete science to this. Because I feel that psychological safety is so important to people, that if they know you're on their side, even if they mess up, they did something exciting. And when people try, and even when they mess up, they can't wait to call me. And how I know a coaching client has not really done it is when I say, how did it go? How did the conversation go? Oh, it's fine. No need to even discuss it anymore. I already know they didn't do it, because if they did it, they'll go, I can't wait to tell you this. I can't even believe it. I'm so excited. Or they'll say, I feel terrible. I need help. I really screwed up. And it'll be one or the other. It won't be neutral. It won't be, that's good. We got that. Let's go. What's the next thing? I already know there will be a high emotion attached to going past your comfort zone.
I can absolutely vouch to that. I can attest to that. I haven't been, in the same part of the conversations as you. I just got a question that's got some really good comments coming in. On the next one of the A's, certainly in my mental list anyway, which is appeasement. And it's just, what's wrong with a little bit of appeasement? Chamberlain did a bit of appeasement. That works out all right. What is the problem with appeasement?
I think it's okay every now and then if there's no harm done, because we all will just appease a little bit to kind of calm things. But where it becomes mismanagement, let's say you're a manager and someone comes to you with an idea and they're really strong on this idea and it's not going to work. And you go, great idea. Let's bring that up at the next meeting and have everybody vote on it. That's a way to appease someone instead of saying, well, there may be some challenges, but here's what we have to do. So appeasing is to get something off your plate, and telling someone something's funny when it's not, agreeing with something when you don't, I'll get back with you later when you know you're not going to, getting invited to the benefit or the auction or whatever, and you don't want to go, and every bone in your body is going, oh my God, I can't do one more thing, but I'm going to say yes. And then at the last minute, I'm going to say, oh, I didn't know this, but my dog had to go to the vet. My mom's sick. I had this thing come up. Appeasing is just backpedaling in the moment and making a promise that you're not going to keep, and you already know that you're not going to. That's what appeasing is.
And this is for, you know, with us consultants, is when somebody says, yeah, send me a proposal. Yeah. And their hands are saying, get out of my office. But they're saying, yeah, send me a proposal. And what they really mean is, you know, that way I don't have to say no right now, because that would be stressful. And I find that, I mean, I suppose on the flip side, you tend to appease people that you like and avoid people that you don't like, but it's still on that kind of passive resistance rung of the ladder, isn't it?
It's all really avoidance. I just have the 3 A's to show you the distinctions of how avoidance shows up. And again, Martyn, I mean, so true. Like I had to learn when I started trying to understand how to go from being a trainer and a speaker to a consultant and really offer problem solving. I was so green, and as we all are when we're learning something new. The worst thing you want to hear after the first conversation is send a proposal, because you have to get conceptual agreement. If they say send a proposal, you're going to work all weekend on it. And the truth is, they're not even the decision maker. They're not interested. They already know they're not going to do it. And we all do this to salespeople or to people that want some sort of favor. Like, go ahead and write the proposal, which to them, it feels like they're doing something good for you and you feel good in the moment. But once you realize you spent, 12 hours trying to prepare something and perfect it, and they really didn't have the intention of following through and they make an excuse, that's when your anger will come out. And that's where it's your choice to say, the story I'm telling myself is that you weren't really planning on buying this. And I want to just clear up what I could have done better. Or like my understanding was that if you ask for a proposal, like we don't have those conversations, we just close the door and we move on. And I'm not saying everything merits a conversation. Sometimes you just learn and you put on the big girl pants and you say, okay, I'm learning. But if you want to have a relationship with someone, like if you're never going to see that client again, that's fine. But if you want to have an ongoing relationship, you're going to have to clean that up, or there's going to be resentment.
And that's the thing that I think that people don't necessarily appreciate about the kind of appeasement approach to avoidance, is that it is corrosive long term. It does undermine and destroy relationships pretty quickly. And just on that kind of corrosive, because I've got a few messages around the aggressive response. A couple of questions. One around what is the best way to lessen the aggressive response when it's presented, and a second one which we can kind of come to separately, which is particularly around passive aggression. So do you want to pick those ones up first in terms of the kind of the straightforward aggressive response? How do you lessen the aggressive response when that's what you're getting?
Well, you may have to learn the hard way, like me. Like usually if someone gets aggressive with me, I go right for the jugular. That's not a great thing. It depends on your relationship. And if you trust each other, that can be okay because you know them and it's fine. Because it's really more about the relationship than it is about being perfect in your behaviors. But if you sense that someone's going to be aggressive, you have to have a plan so that you can start reprogramming your response, because you're not going to do it just from reading a book. You're going to have to say, okay, I already know what they're going to say, but I'm willing for it to be different. They might be aggressive. They might yell. And here's what I'm going to do. It sounds like you're getting angry, like it's about bringing it up. And they might say, oh, no, not at all. I'm just passionate. Well, what I need from you is, I want to discuss this, but not like this. Or I'm not available to be yelled at. I get that you're passionate about this. And I'm like reiterating and going, I call it speaking to the vision. I'm here to support you. I'm not your adversary, but I want to push back. I need to push back because that's going to make us make a better decision. Can you agree to that? And I can tell you're passionate, but are you willing to be open to a new idea? So it's continuing to fulcrum point of change. Are you willing to hear something different? I'd like to push back. I need to push back because we need to make a good decision. I'm not available for that. And I understand, like, I'm not judging you, but I'm also telling you there's a boundary. I'm not going to be cussed at. Like I was working with a female executive the other day, and I couldn't believe the way she told me how one of their investors spoke to her. It was beyond anything I've heard. And I said, oh, no, not at all. That is not going to happen. Get really clear about what your boundaries are, because the one with clarity navigates the ship, and people do what they do because it works. So sometimes you can even pause and say, excuse me, and just hold a pause. But what you've got to do is have the capacity not to get drawn in and do the same thing yourself. That's the key. And if you're feeling like you're going to say, look, we're both passionate, and I'm kind of at capacity. I've had a rough day. Let's revisit this tomorrow at 2:00. here's what I want for us to come to an agreement, to come to a conclusion. Let's list out what we think the advantages and disadvantages are. So the real key here is to take control of your own emotions and take control of the conversation. That's the key.
And you've written about this a fair bit, and you and I have had proper conversations about this. You shared with me what you describe as the 3 levels of response to aggression, which I think is, this is from my analysis, this is your kind of your steps to how do you not get sucked right into the fight there. Talk to us about those 3 levels of response.
I'm not connecting with that.
Oh, okay. Maybe that was my name, but you talked about building strengths. You talk about don't try to win, and you talked about focusing on the outcome. So that
that's right. So those, yes, that's triggering that as well. Like focus on the outcome, which is speak to the vision. Always do that. Like be willing to be wrong. Again, that's like questioning your narrative. And give up the need to be right. That is the problem right there, is that I need to be right and I need for you to understand. But at a certain point when the decision is yours, you don't need someone to understand. You'd like for them to understand, and you leave the door open for understanding. But this as a leader, you have to make decisions that not everybody will like. So you kind of have to give up the need to be liked or to please everybody and stop being that best friend leader or that hero leader. Because if you're that, you're going to disappoint someone. And again, I think it's about values and vision. It's about that end result. Like if you know your intention from the beginning, you'll stay on task and you'll stay on point. But there's one of my favorite authors says, if you don't know your intention before a conversation, you'll know it afterwards. And so I know people that are very manipulative. In fact, this one person I was talking about, her investor is very manipulative. And she can tell when he's being extra nice and doing nice things and saying nice things because there's going to be a slam later on. And I said, you got to bring that forward. You got to say, when you're starting to act like this, I start to think something's up, because it's happening. And to say that elephant's not in the room is only allowing it to be there.
But focusing on the outcome, I think, was a real kind of eye opener for me. And that's one of the things that's changed how I manage those tense conversations. And people who've been in workshops with me will know that that I don't run out of patience asking the same question 3 or 4 times until people finally kind of come to with a smile. But I'll ask the same question because that's the outcome that I need to get from that conversation. And as you were sort of saying, that's fine.
Well, and something I learned, this too, because you've authored a book. And, if you've ever authored a book, there's a lot of emotion and feeling and like attachments that go into that because it's your work and you've got these ideas and the publisher thinks it needs to be different. And you want a certain cover, they want something else. And where you have to manage yourself is to say, we both want a good end product. We both want this to sell. And they have a certain amount of knowledge that I don't have, and I have to trust some of that. But I'm willing to have the argument in order to find that truth. And I didn't have that on my first book, Stop Workplace Drama. I just thought I knew everything and wanted it the way I wanted it. And I thought the publisher didn't get me. And I had to learn from just making mistakes that they want it to sell. And my ideas aren't necessarily the right ideas. So be willing to be wrong. That's one of them.
Exactly. I've certainly done that one in my time. Pippa's asked a really interesting question because the 3 A's, this is where I've steered the conversation around, with the dysfunctional sides of conflict when conflict goes bad. So the 3 A's are negative. What is there a way, a simple form to look at the positive routes out of conflict or the positive ways to manage conflict?
Yes. Well, conflict, when you change your interpretation of it, the way you behave changes. Because if you change your interpretation to it's simply opposing drives, desires, and demands, that means I know what my drive, desire, and demand is, and I'm not going to assume that you understand what those are, and I'm not going to assume that I really understand your end result. Because once you agree on the end result, the process will show up later. But a lot of times we're trying to figure out process before we figure out end result. I think that's what's happening in US politics right now. We don't even have this end result that we want. We don't have a vision. And without a vision, the people perish. So you have to understand an end result and agree on that first, because without that, you're simply arguing about the how-to when you don't even know the end result.
So those things that you talked about there, the shared outcome, or at least the shared sense of what the outcome needs to be, the space it needs to be in, and then trying to align drives, desires, and demands, or at least reconcile the differences between those two things, is a really good route out of conflict. So have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, that is, because this is a distinction that became really important for me as well. This is a great distinction, I think, in the business world. There's a difference between opportunity and alignment. And if you take opportunity that's not in alignment with the vision, values, mission, bigger goals, that's going to be a lot of conflict eventually. Because I see a lot of people taking on business partners that have a whole different philosophy, and they're doing it for the money only, and they're not considering every other part and piece. There's always really unmanageable conflict when you do that. So in my best world, it's about opportunity plus alignment, but alignment always trumps opportunity in my mind. Always be aligned, because you'll never lose by doing that.
And there was a question that I did say I would loop back to, which was around the passive aggressive. Is this a big thing in the States, passive aggressive? Because it's pretty much cultural embedded over here. It's just the way that we are. So do you see passive aggression?
Oh gosh, yes. And I was once called the queen of innuendo, so like I can truly be witty and sarcastic and passive aggressive. It's about, once again, being able to question the motive, question the behavior. So when someone says something and it stings, you have a lot of choices in your response. You can say, well, touche, or all right, I'll get you later. Like, you can have fun with it. If it's a good relationship, there's no reason to get so offended all the time. If it feels like it's becoming bordering on, there's some real hidden meaning there, that again, it's interpretation, and all you can go by is how you experience it. And, you can say, well, are we okay? It sounded like there was a slam in there, like you're angry about something. Is there something we need to talk about? So, because really, you're just checking in to see if there's a hidden meaning. And if not, if you're just having fun, I can have fun like that. But when it starts hurting feelings and causing problems in productivity, that's a problem.
So my kind of takeaways from these points so far is a really huge amount of this is about sort of self-awareness, awareness of your emotional response to the way other people are behaving. A big chunk of it is around language and control of the conversation, which seems to flow. A lot of that flows from having a very clear idea of the outcomes that you want to get from the conversation, then constructing your language around those and making sure that you keep, that you're able to accept, but also push on with your part of it is around the kind of the regulation of your emotion. And you think, I mentioned before, you sort of the building the strength to get used to building, to get used to managing your emotions in conflict situations. I guess that's where my sort of ideas around the conflict maturity of teams comes from. They're used to the way that individuals interact. They're used to having to sort of deploy that energy, manage their emotions to get the outcomes that they want. And then you talked there about before this sort of shared outcomes, getting shared outcomes, and then working out the differences in the factors which are creating this conflict. Are there any other sort of big insights that you would sort of lay out, any kind of top tips you give people who are working in an environment where there is either dysfunctional or unresolved conflict?
I'd say work on clarity, the clarity of the end result, clarity of your own intention, because once you're clear, you can guide things. And this is just an example. I was working with a business owner the other day who was wanting to ask someone that was old enough to retire, because they haven't been pulling their weight for quite a long time, which tells me conversations have been avoided. They've been avoided, and they've been rewarded on loyalty only, not on job performance. And now there's this problem. So the inner conflict is, for this owner, I enjoy this person, I like them, but at the same time, I'm paying them, close to 6 figures, and they're bringing in, and they're doing the work of a 30,000 a year person. And so that's the conflict. And the conflict is they've let that go on too long. When they had that conversation, it didn't go well, because obviously that person felt blindsided. So you've got to get really clear about what's the reason for this change that you're wanting? What's the outcome that needs to happen? And to be able to let that person have her kind of outburst. I mean, that was hard for this leader, but she's learning that if you're not clear and if you're avoiding, that avoidance is going to cause trouble later. So what happened was, after she talked about letting this person go, the next part of the conversation became about, how can I hire her as a contractor to do the same work on an hourly basis that she already wasn't doing a good job on? That conversation came, so she lost her focus. She wanted her out of the organization, basically. And then all of a sudden, because this person needs insurance and needs more money to pay for her husband's insurance, the conversation became about, how can I hire her for the very same job she's not doing good at and pay her less? And I said, if that was going to be the conversation from the beginning, it was a different conversation, right? Because now you're going to the island called making sure she's happy and making sure her financial needs are met versus what you need for your business. So before you start making decisions, you better figure out what parts you want to align to, because alignment is about harmony. And the truth is, she was having a hard time letting go of this person. She just wanted to pay her less. That's the truth. And she didn't get coaching for that, because if we would have had a conversation, I'd say the truth is, you want her to stay employed doing the data management. You don't want her to do events. That conversation is a different conversation than, I want you to retire because I can't afford to pay you.
Yeah. And it is all about outcomes, isn't it? I had a conversation quite recently with a chief executive, somebody in the organization who's struggling where they are. And he came up with half a dozen different alternatives. Well, could she do this or could she do that? And my observation sort of after a little while was, you really want to keep this person, don't you? And he said, oh God, no, ideally I'd like to get rid of her. So, wow. So why are we having the conversation the way we're having the conversation? So outcomes are absolutely key. What role does communication and poor communication play in the compounding of conflict? And is there a way to help people communicate better about this sort of thing?
Yeah, there is a way. I mean, there's all kinds of, it's self-awareness is at the core, and communication is everything, because I can't read your mind. I can only tell myself stories about what you're doing or why you're doing things. And those stories may be grounded in fact, or they may be grounded in my programming. And so communication is everything. And in my mind, like I talk about conflict capacity, to me, that's the method to use, is building conflict capacity. And I look at that as three different pieces. There's the inner game, which is all my own self-awareness, my awareness of my narrative, my storytelling, my willingness to expand myself to deal with that. There's the outer game, that's the skills building, the techniques, the tools. I think inner game's more important, because you can have all the techniques and the tools in the world, but if you've come in from a place of manipulation, it's not going to work. So I think there's the inner game, the outer game, then there's the culture. You're, like you've mentioned, we're in certain cultures. You're, in England, I'm in the US, there's different cultures to that respect. There's different cultures in small companies, within departments. So culture, that's the environment that's going to shift how we do things and how we see things. So there's three basic components of that. And the one that you have complete control over is your inner and outer game. You can work on that. On the culture, you can change. You can go to a different culture. You can be a thought leader in your own department and expand some of that. But there's only so much you can do within the culture, because your environment's going to influence your behavior. So in my mind, your inner, what you put in yourself, the content that you listen to and that you learn and you read, and the people you hang out with, that's the number one, is your inner game.
And just quickly before we finish, thank you for all of that. And that was a brilliant summary. So two things, because I know that you're writing a book, but that's not out for a little while, is it? Is that next year?
Yeah, we'll do this again when it comes out.
I was going to say, so you can't put that now. But where can people hear more from you? Because I know you do a lot of stuff. What's the best way for people to just kind of tune in and hear more of this stuff from you?
I'm starting to do some LinkedIn lives, and I'm attempting to do 2 times a month. So if you go and connect with me on LinkedIn, Marlene Chism, or else you can follow if you don't want any more connections. If you just tell me that you met me here, because what I hate is when people just want to sell me a website, or they connect with me saying, I think your stuff is great. Well, actually the algorithms told me to connect and I could sure help you make your web better. Like, I'm like, oh, that's like not relationship building. But if you want to connect with me, just tell me where you met and I'll connect, and then you'll be updated. And if you follow, you'll be updated on the LinkedIn lives that are free. And I've got people, it's a global community. I had people from India today, Brazil, all over the world. And so if you want to get on my newsletter list, and this is if you don't mind getting an email, you know, once a month, or once a week, because I do it on Mondays, it's marlene@marlenechism.com. There's a download that's for free, but I'm past the point of trying to beg people to get on my list and then bombarding them with things to sell. I just try to give value. And so if it bugs you to get a lot of emails, don't do that. But you can go to my YouTube and you could subscribe there. I don't have a whole lot of subscribers, but what I've been doing is putting my LinkedIn lives on there so that people can share those with their employees or their managers. So just free content right now in my attempt to get my work out there so that I make the publisher happy. It was like so many steps, right? Make the publisher happy and you'll get consulting as a result. So that's kind of, you do all this work to get one gig, right? But I'd love to have you connect with me on LinkedIn and go and see some of the videos if you're interested.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marlene. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. I thought that was really fascinating. It's a really, really important topic. If you're interested in the next session, our invites will go out later this week. So you'll get an invite. It's on strategies for a changing world, because everything is changing and everything is uncertain, which means, in my mind, we need to fundamentally rethink how we think about strategy. And I'll be doing that on Tuesday, 13th of July, same time, same place. Invitations out later this week. And hopefully I will see you all there. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Take care, everybody.
Bye.